of gluten-free diet and the management of celiac disease. So I'm delighted to start by introducing Dr. Vanina Noejovich, who is a psychologist working for the Farnham Family Digestive Health Research Institute, and she is part of the Nutrition Initiative, which has been running now for about the last 12 to 18 months. She has a vast clinical experience in mental health in Latin America and Europe, and her work in Canada has focused on understanding the psychological impact of chronic gastrointestinal conditions. Her research focuses on understanding patients' experiences and challenges to implementing dietary recommendations, looking to improve the well-being of patients by identifying psychosocial issues that impact their quality of life. Previously, her research focused on assessing early life stressful events in patients with chronic gastrointestinal diseases, and she now works with the Hamilton Family Health Team as well, collaborating with family doctors to assist patients with mental health conditions and psychosocial issues. So, Vanina, Dr. Noejovich, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, David, and thank you, the Celiac Association, for inviting me to this conference. So I will share my screen now. Okay. So I will address in this presentation the psychological impact on celiac disease diagnosis. So the main points that I will address will be disordered eating, the psychosocial impact on celiac disease, and strategies to cope with adjusting to the gluten-free diet. So let's start to understand what disordered eating is. So disordered eating is something that sits on the spectrum between what we consider a normal eating pattern and an eating disorder. So from that aspect, any diet can be disordered eating. Encompass a wide range of irregular eating behaviors without a specific underlying diagnosis. But it also can include symptoms and behaviors for an eating disorder, but less frequent or severe. And for this reason, imply a red flag for an eating disorder. So some of the signs presented in disordered eating are frequent dieting, or is consistent schedule, or skipping meals, chronic weight fluctuations, some rigidity around rituals and routine related to food and exercise. It can present some feelings of guilt and shame associated with the eating patterns, excess preoccupation around food, weight, or body image that affects negatively the quality of life of the person. Also can be seen as a sense of loss of control around food, including compulsive eating habits, and using exercise or food restriction, fasting, or purge to make up for the bad food consumed. So why is important? Why celiac disease patients are considered to be in high risk of develop a disordered eating? So for celiac, the main treatment is to follow a gluten-free diet. So the need to manage the diet can contribute to expose them to a disordered eating pattern. There could be some concerns about the consequence of following a gluten-free diet, the impact of a gluten-free diet on the body image that can lead to cycles of binge and restricting eating patterns. This can be a general concerns about food and cross-contamination that can also lead to restricting of some food intake. So for this reason, it's very important to identify disordered eating in celiac patients, because disordered eating can progress into an eating disorder that something more serious. But it can also be a symptom of anxiety and depression, a normal response to the challenge that managing a gluten-free diet present. And it also can increase the risk or worsen the symptoms of mental health. So disordered eating can also have an impact on mental health. For example, somebody already dealing with anxiety may find more challenge to manage the fear of eating out or cross-contamination. And somebody with social anxiety may find more difficult to communicate their needs about the gluten-free option. Gastrointestinal symptoms also can worsen the symptoms of depression that sometimes present as withdrawal from social activities, the tendency to isolate, the feeling of lack of motivation, or even risky or self-harm behaviors. So in addition, there's an increased stress that most people experience due to psychosocial challenge that celiac disease presents. The dietary restriction and fear of contamination will lead to new social behaviors that requires changes in eating and social habits. And having to adhere to a lifelong gluten-free diet requires major life changes, and this can increase the stress level because of the reduced or food choices, or the fear of accidental gluten exposure, the burden of gluten-free diet that involves having to think more time, or to give more time to food and to plan meals, and maybe some changes in the family dynamics, or even financial impact, as gluten-free products tend to be more expensive. But also the stress can just come from the increase of doctor's appointment, or having to go to medical procedures, or even alter plans of the future, like having children or career-wise. All those things can increase the stress level of the person. So for this reason, we understand that the celiac disease has an emotional impact, because the process to adjust to this diagnosis can be overwhelming. And even though initially the person can feel a sense of relief, having a cause of their symptoms, sometimes that they have been experienced for some time, it's normal to have an emotional response to a chronic condition. In this case, because of the challenge to adapt a life without gluten, the person can just feel a sense of loss or grief, or even mild depression, anxiety or fear, because the environment may not feel safe anymore, and the adjustment related to family and social life that sometimes can trigger some conflicts or the tendency to isolate, but also a feeling of being excluded from social or family events when the gluten-free product options are not available. But also this can be a perceived feel of lack of confidence, whether they will be able to overcome the many obstacles that following a gluten-free diet present. So the first step is to normalize the responses to a chronic disease diagnosis. Acknowledge and embrace your feelings, because those are normal response to any adjustment process. Sadness and grief for the things that we left behind, the things that will no longer be possible. Stress and anxiety resulting from this transition. Every time that we go through any change, there will be an increased level of stress and anxiety. Accept the challenge, because behavior is very hard to change and requires time. And in this case, food plays a central role in our lives. So it makes sense that the adjustment and the change will happen in different areas of your life, and all together at the same time. So allow the change, but give yourself time, because this journey will require time. Normalizing the fear, like any other emotion, not either good or bad. And the main purpose of fear is to serve as a signal to that will just tell us that we are exposed to some danger or threat, and this will trigger an adaptive response, so we can make the environment feel safe again. So the fears actually can help us to regain the control of our environment. So first you identify the threat, and that is when the fear will be experienced. But after, you will develop the strategies to regain that feeling of safety net. So again, give yourself time to navigate to the process of learning about celiac disease and gluten-free lifestyle. And knowledge will be your number one strategy to regain control of your environment. So building resilience, which basically means to develop and acquire strategies and tools to reduce the level of stress, And the number one strategy to do that is to practice self-care. That basically is to turn your life into a more healthy lifestyle. Proper nutrition, getting enough sleep, and having regular exercise. So if you have a hobby, or maybe you before had a hobby and you didn't have time to practice that hobby, maybe this is the time to go back to that. Hobbies and sports help us to with self-concept and self-esteem and feeling in control again. If you have to deal with lack of motivation, join into a group will help you with that. You can choose either a celiac, be part of a celiac advocate group, but also just getting into a hiking, walking groups, or even sign for dances classes. So this time building connections and community involvement from a different lens. Believe that change is possible. Our society has changed. There's more awareness about celiac disease these days. And this translates into more popularity about the fruit and grain-free diet that also involve more choices without gluten in the supermarket or even in restaurants. So our take-home message will be dietary modification increase your risk of developing eating disorder. So if you have any concerns at all about your eating patterns, just talk with your doctor. That's the first step to start this conversation. Adjusting to a gluten-free diet is challenging, so give yourself time. That's number one rule. Give yourself time, because every big change requires time. And allow yourself to feel, to experience your emotions and a normal response to this big adjustment that you have to go through. Thank you very much. And now we go to questions.